happy, healthy, beautiful day to you guys. Eric Higgins here, holistic health coach and actor, calling out of Portugal on a mission this year to impact the lives of 100,000 people. And part of that mission is going to be helping people through their fat loss struggles. This is a pretty hot topic and a controversial and confusing topic that a lot of people struggle with. And we're here to smash some paradigms on what is not true and what is actually fact. Scientifically proven facts that will help you not just today, but tomorrow and for every day in the future to create the conditions for not only your best health, but your best body composition. I always share with people, if you're too focused on the mirror, you're in trouble. So focus on how you feel, how you move, and as a byproduct, the aesthetics will come. You have to love on yourself and be patient. And we're here today with none other than Dr. Drbobrakowski, one of the best in the game of functional medicine, 33 years in clinical practice as a chiropractor, as a kinesiologist, as a clinical nutritionist, a degree in nursing and a degree in engineering, looking at how does the body work from all elements, from the energy systems, from nutrition, from every single point of view that you could imagine. Dr. Bob has had a curiosity around how do we become better? How do we teach better? How do we live better? And how do we educate people to go and live their absolute best life? So Dr. Bob, the privilege is always to have you on these calls, dropping knowledge bombs and actually really helping people to take tangible steps.
Thank you always. And isn't that the real point of every conversation, or hopefully any interaction with a human, is to lead them and inspire them to better choices. And so I'm happy to be your partner in this effort. And certainly you live by example. So thank you for that.
I've no choice, as I was discussing with Isa yesterday, actually, or Sunday on a walk. I had this knowing from a very young age, from liking the feeling of moving the body quickly. I knew that it was something I needed to do for my entire life. I didn't need the education. I didn't need that. It was built in. So for those people that sense of awareness isn't built in, it can be a big struggle. And we understand that. But most importantly, you have to get the basics right. If you don't get the basics right, guys, you're in trouble. You are going to fall down. There are no quick results. You might get quick responses, but the strategies, they're not usually that quick. The mindset is everything. And if you're patient and you're willing to do the basics consistently, you will reap the benefits. But let's talk first of all about the why, the risks. As I said, I didn't need an education on staying lean. I knew that was a priority for me. I knew that was going to happen as a consequence of movement. But for a lot of people who don't necessarily take fat loss that seriously, what are some of the health risks, Dr. Bob, associated with excessive fat gain and maintenance on the system?
Literally, it is a gateway to all chronic disease. And you start looking back, we go back a few decades ago where they started doing brain scans. And if they did a brain scan on a 50-year-old individual that was in the obese category, biologically, they could tell that their brain was 16 years older at age 50. And by the way, it's not just their brain, it's really all the tissues of their body. And then when they looked at people that were overweight, about half that, right? About 8 years of extra biologic aging. Now, in this part of the world, it's interesting that I asked this question in Europe when I was there a month ago, but we have the phrase little old lady, little old man. We don't have the phrase big old lady, big old man, because big people rarely get to be old. And if they do, they've got a serious battle with generally chronic illness. So ultimately, it's a risk for everything. It's the number 2 risk factor for cancer, the number 1 risk factor for heart disease, the number 1 risk factor for diabetes. It's a risk factor for autoimmunity, depression, even gut distress. All of this is related to a body that's carrying more weight than is ideal for it.
Yeah, it's something that needs to be addressed as well, because not all fats are the same. Not all fats are functioning in the body exactly the same. And there are different roles that fat plays and different kinds of fat. Could you just share a little bit about what are the roles of fat in the body, why it's important to get in more fats, and what are some of those main differences of different types of fat so people can get a bigger picture as to what's going on inside?
To get more generic, and let me give the first thing, fat is a storage tissue. And you store energy that you can ultimately access. And even someone who's very lean, believe it or not, if their body's just running off baseline energy, they have somewhere between 2 and 3 months worth of energy stored in their body fat. Whereas we look at carbohydrate storage, people can barely get through a day if that's what they're burning is carbs. And then understand protein can be broken down to create fatty acids and or sugar. And we don't want to break down protein. We certainly don't want to get there. But so it's going to be stored energy. It's going to be a protective issue. Is padding for organs also helps us to stay warm. And while you talk about the major types of fat, there's white fat, there's brown fat, there's beige fat, which is right in between. And the brown fat is really supposed to increase your energy in terms of heat. And it'll actually just burn in and of itself. And you literally do burn fat, interestingly enough, even though there's not a flame. It's a process called oxidation, which in the dictionary says an act or instant of burning. But that's the kind of fat that's going to be a lot more healthy. The white fat, harder to break down, not much more than just stored energy and pro-inflammatory. Beige fat is going to be somewhere in between.
When it comes to association, where is most of the white fat to brown fat stored then, Dr. Bob?
They could both be mostly anywhere all over the body, but the brown fat is the upper back is its primary site. But it'd be interesting to do biopsies of someone like Wim Hof, who has subjected himself, because they know that cold will increase your brown fat. I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like that with that level of training literally put it all over his body. And so the difference between the two fats is one just going to sit here and hold energy for when I need it, or is the other going to be metabolically active tissue to keep you warm? Upper back tends to be the highest concentration for that, but not just looking at white fat versus brown fat, but there's a quote from the medical literature that says regional fat distributions under endocrine control. So the hormones are going to determine where it shows. If someone stores belly fat, that's stress fat, that's cortisol, especially the intra-abdominal fat. And then you look at ladies, they tend to store it in the hips, thighs, buttocks. That's estrogen toxic fat. Now, men can get that too, interestingly enough. You want to have all aspects of your life and health in order to achieve your best body composition.
A question or a misconception that comes up quite regularly is, how do I lose body fat from? And as I try to share with people, if this bottle of water was your body and the water inside the body was your fat, how do you lose water from here or from here? It doesn't work that way. We've got to take a whole body approach in that regard. So we could shake that off. You're not going to do tricep extensions to get rid of what they call the bingo wings for some of the ladies. You notice, well, that's a very Irish term, the bingo wings, or the love handles on the gents. It has to be a top to toes approach for burning fat. Have you had many clients have issues with that challenge as well, Dr. Bob, where they get fixated on a certain area of the body?
More often than I care to even admit. And you just got to wonder, how do people get locked into this very narrow point of view? And even further, did an obesity series around the world in 2005. And at that time, they said, fat loss is too complex. Medicine doesn't really understand it. So what was their intervention that was approved? Either they give a fat blocker, which was named Orlistat, and we nicknamed it Oilistat because a whole bunch of people had uncontrolled bowel leakage. That wouldn't be fun, right? Or as they would call it, mild fecal incontinence. Or they just butcher the digestive system. Now they've got a couple different drugs that are out there. But here's the simple fact. If people stop the drugs, guess what? The weight comes back. And they often create a bigger problem than what they did trying to get a quick fix rather than a legitimate change.
Yeah. Another thing about the perception of getting these changes is our weight and the scales. And as I learned a long time ago as a coach, just getting a weight measurement for your progress is irrelevant because your weight can fluctuate from day to day. And unless you're stepping into a ring, I don't feel there's a necessary need to be weighing yourself every other day. Maybe if you're looking to get your overall body mass weight and testing your body fat percentages as well. But what do you find are the most effective ways to measure your progress in your fat loss journey?
Now they've got a pretty sophisticated scan that's probably been out for about 25 years, but they've dramatically lowered the radiation, something called DEXA, which stands for dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. And you know what? There's a DEXA facility a couple miles from my office. And they said, hey, look, we'd like to offer you a nice DEXA scan. And I said, listen, I read about that a few decades ago. The radiation might be more than I want to subject myself to. And with their higher speed X-rays, lower everything, the guy actually told me, and that's what it says on their website. So I'm hoping attorneys signed off on this. They said a DEXA scan is like eating 4 bananas. And I didn't even know that bananas had radiation. And I looked it up. They actually do. But DEXA is going to be top of the line. We do something called bioimpedance analysis. And we have a medical grade bioimpedance analyzer. Sometimes people will step on a barefoot scale and it'll actually measure different electrical parameters for the body and try to have a calculation that turns out to say what their body fat is, but those aren't very accurate. The commercial grades much more. But here's the simple fact that you're making. And that is that you can have a fantastic body composition and maybe be called obese. And I still recall when I did my first bioimpedance on Evander Holyfield 2.5 decades ago. This guy was so lean, so strong, so big. And in the medical model, he would actually have been obese. But this guy was in low single-digit fat percentages. So the scale is only part of the story. Body composition is more the story. DEXA, pretty good way to get it now. Bioimpedance analysis, another good way, easier, less expensive. But ultimately, you want to know what your body's made of. And when you lose weight, you want to know, did I lose fat? Did I lose water? Did I lose lean? And in a perfect world, you actually lose the fat, gain the lean. Although most people haven't created a protocol or even been exposed to one that can do both those things.
Yeah, that's another misconception, isn't it? Of burning fat and gaining muscle. The two kind of go against each other in that regard of chemistry, but there are ways to offset, I believe, with the right kinds of stimulus that you do set up the conditions to be burning fat so that at rest, or if you're doing something more cardio based, that you're still getting the benefits of the higher intensity work at rest. And we'll talk more about resistance training later in this call, but the microbiome, Dr. Bob, and for you guys in simple terms, the ratio of bugs in our gut, it doesn't matter what protocol you're on, if you're on the best nutrition plan, if you're on the best training, you got the best trainer with you who's there, live-in trainer, and you're paying him a fortune. If your microbiome is out of whack, or if you've got this obese microbiome tendency, you're in trouble if you don't fix the root cause. So can you tell us about the microbiome, Dr. Bob, and what is this obese microbiome?
Sure. Here's a fascinating thing that I think most of us know. Human beings do not digest fiber. So if you take a plant and you swallow it without breaking it down, you don't get through the cell wall, you don't get the nutrition because we do not digest fiber. But there are certain bugs in our gut that do digest fiber. And very simply, the data on this is almost mind-boggling. When you take a person that has a healthy gut, and we could use you or Heloisa or myself as an example, you eat a salad. If it was just a bowl of spinach, you would probably burn more calories chewing it up and processing than you'd actually extract from the food. But if you have the wrong balance of bugs in the gut, the bugs will actually eat the fiber, and what they poop out is actually fatty acids. Now, fatty acids have a lot of benefit for our system, but reality is most of us are not getting enough good fat. And if you have that obese microbiome, you're going to be absorbing fat that increases inflammation, increases illness, increases stress, decreases metabolism. And for those that are live with us, maybe our Facebook pages or YouTube, but they actually decided, all right, let's do a very interesting experiment. They had 2 human adults that were twins living in a very similar environment or even a close to identical environment. One of the twins became morbidly obese while the other stayed lean. And as they looked a little further, they thought, okay, this guy had way more antibiotics. Maybe it has something to do with the bugs in the gut. So they decided to do a fecal transplant. So they took feces out of the backside of the obese twin, put it into an identical twin mouse, and ended up doing the exact same thing with the lean twin. And the mouse that got the obese microbiome on the exact same diet, the exact same quality, the exact same quantity, the exact same timing became obese while the other stayed lean. So this microbiome is one of many factors that can disrupt how your body processes food in a way that can make you obese. And there's an author named Sean Stevens. He talks about the caloric effects, what's above the calories, and certainly microbiome is there. And other things like processing of the food. When people eat processed food, they eat substantially more calories. It's interesting that the processed foods just don't have the same level of satiety. And over time, if you're going to be eating more calories, you're going to be gaining more weight. It's just that simple.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuggets in that I wanted to address on this. If you get stuck in the whole counting calories in versus calories out approach, you're also going to struggle. Life and eating shouldn't be a maths class. There are certain situations where you might want to take out the scales. Maybe you're about to step on stage or you're doing some form of competition or an experiment, if you would, on how you handle certain volumes of food. But for consistency, I think if you have to take out the scales or start doing maths when you're going to eat, you'll start to resent the process of eating. And I think that's probably not the best approach to take when it comes to enjoying your food and getting a sense of intuitive eating when it comes to what is full for you. We had a lot of food when we were in Portugal recently, Dr. Bob. I remember you sharing with me as well my 80% full rule. And I chuckled as I was overdoing it myself. And I said, Dr. Bob, what's that? Would you care to share where you're coming from when it comes to volume and what you assess?
So the first time I heard something of that mindset was in a very early nutrition course over 3 decades ago. And the instructor said, look, it ought to be your goal to walk away from the table feeling at least as good as before you sat down. So if people have to loosen up belt loops or unbutton a top button, you're going over the top with that. And I've certainly done that a few times, but not too much in recent time, except for that Brazilian steakhouse, right? I probably had a few too many bites, but I didn't unbutton my top button, right? But even with that said, when we start talking about people really being connected to their body, Eric, this is where you have such an advantage over 99.999% of people. You're in tune with your body. You know how it moves. You know how it works, what it feels like to put in something that moves you in the right direction and something that takes away from your ideal best self. And I've always said for decades at this point, if I could teach people one thing, I would teach them to listen to their bodies. You call it intuitive, but if you eat something and you don't feel as good afterwards, something's not right with that. And now when we start talking about weighing yourself, record keepers are record breakers, but we know that there is such a dynamic process for most people. Some people might eat something that has maybe a little more salt in it. Their body's not used to that. They might wake up the next day 4 or 5 pounds heavier. What's going on with that? It's fluid. If you have access to immediate DEXA or bioimpedance, you can tell that. But most big swings in weight day to day are going to be fluid related. So what a lot of people are saying now is weigh yourself if you're comfortable every day after you get up in the morning, before you ate or drank anything, preferably after you had a morning bowel movement. And then at the end of the week, average your numbers. And there will be, for most people, a pretty good significant swing. And if your weekly average starts going down, there's a pretty good idea that your body comp is improving. But what are we talking about in terms of weight loss? Are you losing fat? Are you losing water? Are you losing muscle? Are you losing all the above? And we didn't have it as part of our pre-conversation, but there's a drug called Ozempic. It's here in the US and it was a diabetic drug. And one of the things that people were doing was actually losing weight on it. And other doctors started looking at it. People like Robert Lustig, who was in the Skinny on Obesity, and Peter Attia, who wrote the book, The Drive. And he used these words. Every single patient that he had on Ozempic had a very concerning loss of lean mass while on it. And some of these people, I think it's about a third of the people that tried it couldn't take it because of side effects. And then people stopped it, the weight came back, but also it impacts the satiety centers. And some people never enjoy their food again like they did because they disrupted that process. So there is no such thing as a free lunch. Shortcuts, they're not a good idea. Smart cuts, those are a good idea. And what are some of the smart cuts? Be more in tune with you. And Eric, I'll share, there's one thing that I would teach decades ago because it was so easy. Take your resting pulse. And now I have an Oura ring and I can just look at it, or most people have a Fitbit or something like that. They can look at it. But if you eat a meal and your resting pulse goes up by more than 3 beats per minute, something in that meal was a little distressing to you, unless you got distressed by something else. And my triathletes, before they had heart rate monitors, they'd check their morning pulse. And if their pulse went up, they know they overtrained. If their pulse was steady or lesser, they knew they were in a good zone to train. So just different ways of listening to your body that can be very valuable. But ultimately, you've got the distinct advantage in that you're actually connected to you. So congratulations on that.
That was new for me. You always come on these calls to learn, and I'm grateful that I learned things as well, because I would often have assumed that the elevation of mood or energy was blood sugars alone, but obviously it's moving the heart rate as well. So if you do eat too much, perhaps carbohydrates, or maybe you have a dessert after your main meal and you start to feel a little bit of a kick in your heart rate, then that is a signal that you've overdone it. Not to say all desserts are bad, but certainly having them with a source of fat, I find it is useful to slow down the rate of absorption in the bloodstream, particularly for myself, because if I have something in isolation, a sweet treat, I will work for the sweet treat. I won't say no to it, but I will position it either after a main meal or with a source of fat like peanut butter or coconut oil, just so I feel a little bit better and I can deal with the guilt in a healthy way, at least.
How wonderful that you've known to do that. And people will figure that out over time. Fat's going to slow the emptying. It's going to increase the satiety. It'll prevent the blood sugar from being spiked. All these absolutely wonderful things. And when we start talking about treats, I actually was at dinner with some friends this weekend, and the guy said, well, this is my cheat meal. I had written the foreword to a couple different diet books and cookbooks. And one, they wanted to completely replace the term cheat meal with reward meal. Now, what do you get a reward for doing something special that earned the reward? And I'm going to say, if you're going to use food as a reward, earn it with intense exercise or prolonged exercise, one or the other. But if you haven't earned it, don't put it in your body. Someone's running a marathon. I always thought that was kind of ridiculous. You watch people, their final mile or so, they're drinking Coca-Cola. I thought that's never good, even if you're that low in sugar, just the acid alkaline issue. Most marathons, they have good, clean water and maybe some fruit near the end. That'd be a better choice.
Yeah, you'd be almost saying, good luck, pal, with the cramps you're going to experience at the end of the race. But this is a prime example as well. You often talk about marathon runners and long distance training, that it's not the healthiest thing in the world, that actually shows heart damage after the events. And people can fall into just training one energy system and then hit a plateau in their fat loss journey because they're just training one energy system. They're not working on extending their body's lean mass production. And that can lead to slowing of your fat loss benefits as well.
Anytime you lose lean, you're reducing your metabolic rate. It's just that simple. So we want to maintain that all the way, anytime that we can. And while you mentioned energy systems, interestingly enough, we've got fast energy, that's ATP. We got almost as fast, that's the creatine phosphate system. By the time we get to what's called anaerobic glycolysis, burning sugar in the absence of oxygen, there's 12 different enzyme steps, each with a nutrient cofactor. So that's nowhere near as fast as creatine phosphate or stored ATP. But burning fat, that's through something called the mitochondrial electron transport chain, 22 different steps, each with a nutrient. So it's going to be much, much slower. And different steps along that process can disrupt your body's ability to burn fat. So you literally have to be a healthy person to have, without much effort, a healthy body composition. And Eric, I might not say that you don't put much effort in. You put a lot of effort in, but yet it's because you enjoy it. You listen to your body when you train. You listen to your body when you eat. People want to follow your lead. How awesome is that? Because very few people get there. Now, they're not going to get there in a week or a month, but just imagine if you develop your consciousness over the course of a year or 5 years or a decade, you could be in much better shape and ready to enjoy a beautiful, long, healthy life.
That is absolutely it, Dr. Bob. Every warrior's next best move is a thought and a step in the right direction. So never compare your chapter 4 to someone's chapter 20. We're here to inspire people to move better, to make better choices, and to live a better lifestyle, and actually share that with people and share your daily method of operation. And in a way that you're not shy about it, that you are showing the way. Actually, that's really important, is not to be a talker, but to be a doer and really walk out that activity. And just the last point on nutrition as well, when we talked about the calories in, it's the quality of the calories. And I know we'll talk about that in the Magnificent Seven I wanted to ask you about, but quality is king. Doesn't matter how much quantity you're eating. If you're eating too much of poor quality food, you're just on that excessive calorie overloading, and it's just stressing the body to a point where something will overwork, overburden, or evidently break because you just don't have the nutritional baseline for performance or health.
You said a lot of important things there. So 2 weekends ago, I was giving a lecture in Pittsburgh, and one of the other keynote speakers was Dr. Judy Mikovits, who's an absolute brainiac, brilliant PhD researcher and a good heart as well. But she said this, and she might have got it from somewhere else, but I'm going to credit her with it. Don't count calories, count chemicals. So if we were to look, okay, there's no consensus on what the best diet is. And by the way, everybody's different depending on what's going on in their life. So the best diet now could be a very different diet under a different set of circumstances. But there is a consensus about what the worst diet is. And that's basically the standard American diet. If people are putting processed foods and chemicals in their system, they are going to get fat and sick. I listened to Jordan Peterson talking to Joe Rogan, and these guys don't pull too many punches. And Jordan Peterson was talking about diet. He says, look around you. There's way too many people. He used these words that are fat and stupid. That can't be a good combination. And he says it's got to be what they're eating, at least to a very high degree. And maybe let's just go with what they're ingesting, because if you're ingesting bad ideas or gloom and doom, pretty hard to have a good brain, body, mind, spirit, and life. We want to zealously inspect all things that we allow to enter our mind, our heart, our soul, and our body. And that's a quote from Og Mandino. And I love that quote as much as any quote I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's a sad thing, really. It's sad to see people that are being given the wrong information or don't have the right support or the right information, and they're just going around almost numbed out of it, like poorly operating software. Essentially, what it is, if you deal with it like a machine, is just not operating at its true potential. And you know what? It can be a challenge to address that with other people, because you can't go up to someone and say, "Hey, you really need to lose weight." You can, but there are certain ways to address that. Any advice, Dr. Bob, if anyone has a family member or friend who is dealing with maybe a trauma or dealing with some issue around food, what would you advise as a clinical nutritionist? What would you advise as a friend to say to that person in a way that doesn't offend them and doesn't have them running in the opposite direction?
I love you. I appreciate you. I'd like you to get down to what's really going on that's keeping you from being ideally healthy. And I'm going to suggest that you get help. And if you can suggest where that is, how awesome. But I'm constantly digging into new information and reading. And there's a medical doctor who switched to functional medicine by the name of Peter Attia. And you know what? He was very disconnected from his wife, from his kids. It turns out one of his kids nearly died and was in the hospital in ICU. And he didn't even come home. He was on the road. He was so checked out, and he would basically call and just ask questions like a doctor rather than a father. And finally, his wife said to him, "I don't know what's going on with you, but you're not here." And even under the most extreme circumstances. And then he shared, someone said, "Peter, you need to get help." I don't think anybody would want to admit this, but he had severe childhood sexual abuse. And my gosh, there's probably far too many people that have that going on. And in his case, there was a post-traumatic stress disorder that made him addicted to any kind of escaping behavior. Usually he chose good behaviors, but if you're disconnecting yourself from your family when your family needs you, something's not right. And he went out and found it, and he's still working on healing it. But there was a study on morbid obesity years ago, and it was called the Adverse Childhood Events Study, ACE, ACE. And the vast majority of these people that were morbidly obese had a very abusive childhood. And could that lead to addictive eating or addictive other behaviors that aren't so good? And the sad reality is, yeah, it can. But what's the other end of post-traumatic stress? Post-traumatic growth. And some of you that are watching this, you might know that I've got a good friend and even business partner in Sweden, Camilla Hiller. She was 440 pounds 12 years ago, had gastric bypass, and then through essentially not being able to absorb nutrients, lost a couple 100 pounds in 18 months, but she was starving to death. So we created something called the stress reset. It helped her to get her life back, sleeping through the night, absorbing nutrients, getting rid of pain, things like that. But the conversation I had with her is I said, "Camilla, you have gone through some of the hardest training of anybody I've ever known, life training that is, and now you're in a position to take that and help people get over their own trauma and get on with their life." So my best answer is, if you're not moving the way you should, whether that's physical movement, dietary movement, career life movement, find someone who loves and cares first, and then hire someone competent if you need someone outside of your circle to help you move in the right direction. That's how Peter got there. You've gotten where you've gotten with great coaching. I've gotten where I've gotten with great mentors. And thank you again for helping me move better over these last 3 or 4 months. So I'll put in a nice plug for you. If you haven't trained with Eric yet, train with him. You will be beyond amazed.
Awesome. Appreciate that, Dr. Bob. Yeah, and what an amazing to be able to overcome that and find mentors like yourself, to be able to connect with a friend and be introduced. And that's what's so powerful about these calls, guys. If something resonates with you on these calls, please share them with your friends or someone who might have had that challenge, and drop in some questions as we go along. Obviously, we will address them as we get through the call.
Eric, you're inspiring me to share another story, interestingly enough. And I'll give the Reader's Digest version. As a child, as a baby, I was a very poor sleeper. So my mother would read to me. She said by second grade, I could read. I don't remember that far back. But I remember getting to school, kindergarten, being able to read, not See Jane Run or Spot Run or whoever, but books. And so when I was in first grade, the school said, "You have this group called the TMRs, the Trainable Mentally Retarded. We would like you to read them a book." So I went in their room and I read them a book. And keep in mind, the vast majority of this class all had Down syndrome. And I just remember the kids looking very different. And I went up to my first grade teacher, Miss Murphy, and I said, "Hey, why do these kids all look so different?" And Eric, what she said will make as much sense to everybody in the audience, I hope it does, as it made to me back then. And it absolutely changed my life. She said this: "If you see something wrong on the outside, you know there's something wrong on the inside. If the body's not looking right, if the face is not looking right, if you're seeing that someone's got bags under their eyes or whatever, something's not right. And best thing we can do with everybody is love them and hopefully inspire them to better direction. And maybe that's the summary of all this, right? Love everybody as much as you can.
That's it. That is absolutely it. I really enjoy that story. It just shows you how long lessons can stay with you for a lifetime. When you
Yeah.
really get something and someone has the ability to communicate that with you and see that you're open to learn those things. Speaking about learning new things, intermittent fasting is certainly something that's got a lot of press and interest over the last couple of decades. I'd love to you to just touch on really quickly, Dr. Bob, what are some of the fat loss benefits then? And of course, health benefits.
So interestingly enough, intermittent fasting is probably more health than fat loss, but there's other benefits that could be had there too. So I often tell people that let's just deal with calorie restriction. So it was the early 1930s, a researcher from Cornell, Clive McKay, won a Nobel Prize when he found out if he cut an animal's calories in half, they would double their life expectancy. Pretty powerful. And whatever animal species they checked it in looked and showed that benefit. But we became to realize that when the body's in a fasting state, it's not that it doesn't do without nutrients. It actually breaks down your own reserves, and it can even cannibalize your own cells. And so the process was called autophagy, and it won a Nobel Prize in 2016 that in the intermittent fasting state, which could be probably a 14-hour fasting state, 10-hour food window for some, probably for most 16-hour fasting, 8 hours food. But when the body starts feeding on itself, the first cells that it feeds on are pre-malignant and malignant cells, pre-cancer and cancer cells. And keep in mind, it's estimated that we make between 500 and 1,000 every single day. Now, if your body is breaking down bad cells, that's less to intoxicate the body, and toxins always slow down metabolism. So that could be one of the mechanisms by which it works. But intermittent fasting, probably more overall health benefit. The best thing that's going to get you the fat loss benefit is putting in only quality foods in your food window. Because if people intermittent fast and eat garbage, it's not serving them very well. Now, if you add intermittent fasting to good food quality, then you're going to get the best of all worlds.
Yeah, something that's not on the list there as well that I find is particularly beneficial, Dr. Bob, is clarity and freedom of movement. That is because I rarely train non-fasted anymore. One exception to that rule for me personally is if I'm doing a power or a strength session, I will have a meal before that because I will struggle to get through that fully competently. But if I'm doing anything else, whether it's animal flow or Muay Thai or middle of the road kind of intensity training, I'll go intermittently fasted every time because I feel that I'm more cognitively aware. Of course, I will have at least 2 servings of Reishi coffee or tea, because that gets me in the zone and of course fuels me during the session. But I personally find that in order to do more during the work window and evidently create more fat loss, I don't have the distraction or the discomfort of, let's say, gas or cramping or whatever it may be that would stop you from putting in that full level of performance by having the issue of food being digested during your training.
Food takes a lot of energy to digest and a lot of blood flow. And if people eat and then try to exercise, neither process is going to be as efficient. The more intense you're going to be, you need the fuel to be on board, and different things will do it. But reishi infused coffee is interesting. It doesn't break the fast, but yet it helps the body to be more efficient in terms of energy, more alkaline, less inflammatory process. And it actually says that it can increase the number of mitochondria and the efficiency of mitochondria. So all things that we're looking for. But yeah, ultimately, if you've got a digestive tract full of food and or waste, think about the ultimate fight or flight. A zebra, if it's running away from a lion, it empties its bowels. It's one of the first things that it does. And I remember when someone studied that and they said, well, maybe that 2 or 3 pounds that they just dropped might get them just that 100th of a second extra speed. It's a thin margin between death and survival out there. So pretty fascinating that animals will dump before they know they need to fight or flee.
Survival mechanism for sure. When it comes to the Magnificent Seven, this is something that you teach on every single day and talk about and have talked about at length for many years. So we understand how deep you could go on this, and you could do probably 5-6 hours on each topic. But specifically with the fat loss focus, Why is it so important to get, as we mentioned earlier, the basics of each of these 7 in order to collectively create the conditions for a healthier body composition and be burning fat at rest?
Everything counts and everything works together, either for the benefit or not. So if we go with eat right, as we mentioned, the worst diet in the world is the processed diet. And as Jordan Peter would say, it makes them fat and it makes them stupid. So that's not the way to go. When it comes to drinking right, when our body has the right level of hydration, then literally everything is more efficient. And as you even mentioned, bowel elimination. Bowel is fiber, water, neurologic tone. Water is a big component of that. And picture what keeps our tissues supple and young is good hydration status. In Chinese medicine, water is youth. So when you're well hydrated, you're going to be better off moving around, including moving things through the digestive tract. When it comes to thinking right, if you're under a high stress circumstance, your efficiency drops way off in terms of everything. And so when you're in a low stress circumstance, thyroid works better, insulin works better, metabolism works better, everything's there. So you want to do your best to be able to reach a new state of calm and equilibrium no matter what's going on. Move right. You mentioned there's 4 different energy systems, and there's also fast and slow fiber types. And I tell people that we need to train every fiber type and every energy system. If someone's a power lifter, that doesn't mean they don't have to do some type of aerobic work, just nowhere near as much as someone who's more of an aerobic athlete. But you want to train every fiber type, every energy system proportional to the demands of your sport. Poop right. When you start looking at the amount of toxins in the environment, the increase in toxins has paralleled obesity, diabetes, cancer, neurodegeneration. We live in a very toxic, poisoned world. And if we're not aware of that, and if we don't take specific steps to eliminate that, then these poisons will poison us. Sleep right, you will burn fat in your sleep. That's how you're going to fuel the body. And since we're talking about that, you probably don't want to eat anything 2, maybe 3 hours before bed, because the body's actually going to go through a detoxification process. And if there's food on board, it distracts away from the efficiency of the detoxification. And finally, talk right. Even start with a conversation you have with yourself. So a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to be on this horrible diet and I'm going to be very restricted. And Andy Andrews, one of my favorite authors, but he said, why don't we ask ourselves a different question? How can I learn to enjoy eating and preparing food in a way that helps me to optimize my health? And if you think about that, and the time I was with you in Eastern Portugal, how wonderful. You were a team every day making really good food, good for the body, mind, and spirit. And somewhere along the way, you got the idea that, you know what, this is good for me. And life is probably more fun if I enjoy the process, all processes related to it. But the Magnificent 7, they all count. If we're going with weight loss, probably eat, move, and sleep are the big 3, but poop right's not far behind.
Yeah, and I often mention as well about restriction. If you have a restricted mind when it comes to your nutrition, then restriction will lead to rebellion. And I think it's ingrained in us that no one likes to be told what to do. No one wants to feel restricted, although there are huge benefits to being disciplined. But restricted means you're missing out on something. I think if you have the freedom to explore all that there is to offer and be aware of it, but choose wisely as to when you deserve that treat, that's a different mentality. So I encourage you guys to really resonate with that. Is what do you feel? Where do you find restriction? And if you find restriction, how do you whittle some of that out and see a bigger picture of what that could be for you, so you feel better in the process, so you don't get traumatized going by an ice cream store or where your local fast food joint or whatever it is. Find a way in there for yourself and explore what that really means to you. But just in regards to resistance training, Dr. Bob, this is something that I think a lot of people shy away from, especially as people get older. They think, I shouldn't be lifting weights, or, oh, weights are too heavy, or, oh, that's for the young crowd. It really isn't. You can just go on and see different inspirational stories of people in their 80s and 90s who are deadlifting more than their body weight and then some, well into their late 80s and 90s. So What are some of the benefits then for fat loss, for resistance training and stimulating those the body to different energy systems like you just mentioned?
What's so fascinating is it's not so much the exercise that is where you're going to burn the fat, but the changes that you make in your body afterwards. And our most powerful fat burner is actually growth hormone. And growth hormone is activated by the liver into something called IGF-1. And the ways that you activate that are high intensity exercise and or deep sleep. There's a few secretagogues that can help. Arginine to a minor degree can help as well. But here's the deal. When you train your body hard, your body will use more energy in the repair and the recovery than you burned during the exercise. And so ultimately, with the right type of exercise, and I really, again, like to train all fiber types and energy systems. I'm speaking at a sports conference this coming weekend called the Swiss Conference. And I think I first heard of this term from one of the co-presenters that'll be there, a doctor named Gabrielle Lyons. And she actually is defining something called muscle-centric healthcare, meaning that you want to center everything that you do in terms of getting healthier around keeping and or building a good muscular system. And we can go back 23 years. There was a book written, it was a study out of Tufts University called Biomarkers 2000. And they found out the number one thing that they could measure that would best predict a high quality, functional, and healthy end of life was actually muscle mass. And so how do you maintain muscle mass? You maintain it through really all of the Magnificent Seven, but certainly moving appropriately, eating appropriately, sleeping appropriately are going to be the big three for that.
There you go, guys. If having more lean mass creates more energy, better body composition, better self-esteem, essentially, we must make it a priority. It makes sense, right? When you make it a priority, it doesn't just happen out of convenience. You've got to work for that. And if you're not sure, then reach out to myself or a trainer that's close to you that can help you on that journey so you're safe and that you are progressing in the right means. So just in regards to reishi, our top superfood, we've been sharing this for a number of years. We always talk about real world solutions, getting in there, giving gifts. I would say it is a gift to people to help them to move themselves to a better state of being. And when it comes to fat loss, there's so many elements to reishi and medicinal mushrooms, but particularly with fat loss, there's a number of mechanisms that it helps to really regulate fat loss in the body and do so in a really natural but powerful way, which is completely different to anything you would look in the pharmaceutical arena, because it is a natural molecule. It is found in nature. It isn't being tweaked. It is as it is. And as you said in one of our videos, nature is perfect. You don't mess with nature. But let's look at reishi and how it impacts upon fat loss. Dr. Laura, could you just touch on some of these mechanisms really quickly and how this medicinal mushroom really goes to work inside of our body?
Interestingly enough, even this drug that they're talking about now called Ozempic, they talk about it being something that'll actually curb your appetite. But they also say it decreases less, you get less pleasure out of things around you. And some people never get their food pleasure back ever again. So when reishi does it, people have more satiety. But here's what I'm going to say, because it has all the essential nutrients to keep people healthy. When you start looking at how much fat we absorb and how we burn it, two different things, but by changing the microbiome in a way that promotes fat loss, and this is proven in the literature, you're not going to have the obese microbiome. You're not going to turn fiber into fat. And by lowering stress in the body, which it does, it even lowers the circulating amount of stress hormones in the bloodstream, you actually get more and better activation of thyroid hormone. When you start looking at insulin sensitivity, this is something that so many people struggle with, and their pancreas, because insulin is not working as well as it should, releases more insulin. And here's a simple fact: you can't store fat without insulin. So if we make insulin more efficient and less need to be released, then we're not going to store anywhere near as much fat. Thermogenesis, how do you generate heat? Reishi is known to enhance both the number of mitochondria and the electron transport chain. And guess what? Even within fat. So it can help that transition from either white to beige or beige to brown, or make the brown even more efficient. But that's well proven. Microbiome, again, we somewhat address that in terms of fat absorption. And then sleep quality. If you're sleeping deeper, you're going to release more growth hormone and also better full body recovery. And I've said for years, a great night starts the night before. If you get a good quality sleep, you're much likely to have a better day and a more physically active day.
Yeah, I was just thinking of Charles Poliquin the other day when we were walking up in the hills here in Joinville, in his town, and I was just talking about Charles Poliquin and how blunt he was in articulating certain things. And fat loss, we certainly didn't pull any punches there. But I remember you quoting him there on one of the calls saying the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to recovery and health is your sleep. And anything that will help move you into a better state of sleep, then you're absolutely onto a winner.
Yeah. Charles, God bless his soul. It was just the 5th anniversary of his death a few weeks ago, and a few people posted something on Facebook. His legacy lives on, and he made such a positive impact on so many people. But yeah, Charles never pulled any punches. The biggest bang for your buck is sleep. So let's master that. Let's make that a high priority activity.
Absolutely. Guys, if you're wondering about reishi and this is the first time you're hearing about it, it's a medicinal mushroom. It's been in Chinese culture for thousands of years, over, I believe, 5,000 years of human use. And both myself and Dr. Bob and a number of people we work with are ambassadors that share reishi-infused products with the world. One, because it's amazing, and I believe everyone with a pulse who wants to live longer, feel better, should be consuming it daily. Secondly, it's convenient. So we've actually infused it. Well, I haven't. We've partnered with a company that have patented the infusion process in coffee and tea and in nutraceuticals to extract the most potent form of this medicinal mushroom, of which it ranks as the highest, most nutrient-dense superfood of all time, which is pretty amazing. But when it comes to fat loss, Dr. Bob, we have the reishi spores and also the green tea. Why is this such a powerful combination for fat loss? Obviously, from the roots of its health benefits, but why this coupling seems to be really helping people with fat loss?
I don't want to cut out coffee either, because green tea does have some caffeine. It also has something called theanine, which buffers the central nervous system effects. But caffeine is something that a lot of athletes have used as a stack for weight loss. They might use some things that weren't as healthy with that, but caffeine could be somewhat healthy. And maybe it's more recent data that they figured this out. But I was listening to an Andrew Huberman podcast. People don't know him. He's a neurologist from Stanford, and he's a brilliant guy, but he talks about the neurologic involvement, the sympathetic nervous system with fibers going into the fat and actually triggering the burning of it. And so the caffeine in coffee and green tea will do that. And then when you start looking at the spores, the most potent part of the plant, more anti-inflammatory benefit, more alkalizing benefit, more stress buffering benefit, more microbiome benefit. And then again, when you start looking at coffee and tea, I can go more, even those more than 1,000 published studies on the health benefits of green tea. We know that people that consume the most coffee live the longest. And by the way, if they looked at tea, they'd probably find the same thing there as well, because these things are loaded with other nutrients. But the whole key is, like you said in the beginning of the conversation, quality. So ours is organic, tested for herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, heavy metals, you name it, and it has none of the above. And so coffee, again, we were awarded as the best organic coffee in the world in 2022. I don't know why they don't give an award out for that I'm aware of for tea, but if they did, we'd win that one too.
I think we would be certainly up there in the top 3 anyway, for sure, because every time I share a cup of our green or red tea, which is amazing with cordyceps, is amazing for training, is wow, this is so refreshing and so neutral tasting. So wasn't that interesting? Because a lot of tea bags are bleached, and of course the crops are sprayed, and of course you're ingesting that and you're adding it with hot water, and bada bing, bada boom, you're experiencing that in your mouth. So we deserve better, and this is such a beautiful synergistic way to meet you where you are as a person, as a human who has habits. And this is such a genius way of having the health through the habits. But I see just a number of questions in the Facebook group. Hello, guys, and welcome. Thank you for your comments. We have a question here from Mary. My lipids were tested and cholesterol is 247, triglycerides 109, HDL 74, LDL 151, and cholesterol/HDL ratio 3.3. I'm 5'6" and 142 pounds. I try to eat a healthy diet: turkey, chicken, fish, occasionally red meat, salad, and veggies and fruit. I also like crackers and cheese with a glass of wine. I do try to walk 2 to 4 miles a day. What can I do to lower my cholesterol? My parents had heart disease or heart issues when they were older, late 70s and late 80s for our mom. I'm currently 64.
First and foremost, why would you want to lower your cholesterol? Because what they found out very simply, and I'm guessing that you said you're 64. So British medical journal published a few years ago that a higher level of cholesterol for 92% of people was associated with longevity. Joe Rogan had a cardiologist on there, and I'll go basically to the drugs for just a moment. So the Lancet published 20 years ago that no woman should take statin drugs. No one over the age of 69 should take statin drugs, these cholesterol-lowering drugs. And it also said that high-risk males need to be treated every day for 5 years to prevent one cardiac event. So a researcher out of the UK looked at that and thought, okay, what if you had a male that had one heart attack that was in that high risk range? What if you took a group that took the cholesterol lowering drugs versus a group that didn't? The group that took the drugs lived longer by 4 days. So they were poisoning their body every day. I would suggest lowering their quality of life to get 4 extra days. Hardly seems worth it. The most important cholesterol number is HDL. Only 10% of people that have any level of measurable cardiovascular disease have an HDL above 60. So at 74, you're doing an absolutely great job. And the most important ratio is the HDL. Big study out of Stanford years ago, when HDL exceeds triglycerides, people actually reverse plaquing. You're going to do yourself a good favor to keep moving, because I tell people, even if you start accumulating plaque in your arteries, if you're moving consistently, demanding oxygen, your body will sprout new blood vessels to grow around areas that are not getting as much blood flow. And we've known this for decades. So if you stay physically active, you can create your own bypass. And some people understand, you may have even heard of this, Mary, that someone shows up in the doctor's or emergency room and they say, wow, I'm glad you're here. You have an artery that's blocked 100%. We need to put a stent in there. Listen, if the body didn't have collateral circulation, if it didn't have new blood vessels, 100% blockage of a major artery, you're going to be dead. And by the way, this patient might go in with no symptoms whatsoever. So here's the bottom line. Do all the Magnificent Seven every day. Go ahead and look up, like on YouTube, the myth of cholesterol and cholesterol lowering drugs. And I think more people are beginning to wake up to the idea that there are certain people in this world selling certain products that don't mind stretching or even breaking the truth for profit. And I won't say any more than that, because censorship is alive and well. But zealously inspect all things, including direction. And I love that you asked the question. You were very thorough. Sounds like you're doing a good job with your life. Keep up the great work and partner with people, connect with people that truly understand health. And it seems that you do. So well done, Mary.
Awesome. A quick comment there. We're constantly being bombarded with advertisement of unhealthy food, that it becomes a norm from people. Yeah, it becomes conditioning.
Yep.
Like anything is what are you choosing to surround yourself with? So, or not in this case, because the advertisement's coming at you. But awareness is really key. Esperanza's asked 2 questions here. What are things we should be asking when getting a trainer, especially for women in pre or post menopausal?
I'm going to turn that one to you first, and then I'll add my comment after yours.
Sure. I think that you should go to a specialist personally. And not to say that women are better coaches than men in that case, but they've experienced things or have touch points that we don't. So I would ask for someone in your demographic. Do they know of a trainer that specializes in that area? Or do a good Google search in your area and see what the reviews are. Always go with reviews, because the reviews are really the way to go. That would be my advice to you on that one, Esperanza.
I like to have as much clarity about what your goal is. So if you want to train for a certain athletic event, you want to go with someone that has expertise in training for that event. If you're looking for body composition, you want to go and work with someone that has expertise in achieving healthy body composition. And so one of the lectures we were giving in Portugal, in Lisbon, they said there's a bunch of people claiming to be functional medicine doctors, but all they're doing is measuring hormones and then replacing 5 different hormones in the body. You know what? There's a time and a place for hormone use to reestablish health. But if that's the only thing you're doing, you might create more problems than you fix in the long run. So be very clear about what you want. Then be very clear that someone has the same passion that you do, and work together. But ultimately, it's got to be a fair trial. I think you should know within the first visit if the trainer's the right one for you. Give them a handful, 4 or 5 visits. If you're moving in the right direction, awesome. Sit down and have a conversation. How do we keep moving in this direction? But you're asking the right questions, and you just want to be clear about where you want to go and pick someone that has expertise helping people to get there.
Yeah, nice. Last question then, guys, we need to wrap, is what test would you recommend to heal your gut?
There is a test, a functional medicine test for leaky gut, and it's called the lactulose mannitol test. And it's 2 different types of sugar. One is easy to absorb and the other's not. And if you see the bigger, harder to absorb sugar going out in the urine, you know you have a leaky gut, because that shouldn't get through the wall. Now, interestingly enough, there's a lot of ways to seal and heal the gut. One of my favorite nutrients to do that is colostrum. Another is vitamin D. Another is glutamine. But then, interestingly enough, and this really has gotten press over the last couple of years, If people do a very restrictive diet, like something like the carnivore diet, only red meat for 5 to 7 days, I'm finding people getting away from the carbs that are feeling the bad bugs in their gut can have a remarkable improvement in all of their gastrointestinal symptoms, whole body inflammatory process, and other things going on there. At any rate, you want to get people on your team that are moving you in the right direction. I saw this thing, two things come across, and it threw my mind a little bit because it said strength training because of osteoporosis. You don't necessarily want to buy into that. I have never seen a petite female over the age of 50 that wasn't told she at least had osteopenia and or osteoporosis. And so they're comparing you to a 35-year-old Amazon woman in great shape. At 59, you're going to have some bone loss. Oh, it was leaky gut, lactulose mannitol. Normally, I don't get distracted by things running across it. I had one of those nights last night where I didn't get ideal sleep. So I'm going to budget better this night.
There you go.
All right.
You'll make up for it, Dr. Bob. And speaking of which, guys, just to wrap up the call, we got through a lot of info, but experience trumps knowledge, as we say. And if you want to try our one box challenge, reach out to Dr. Borkowski here on Instagram or to myself. Or if you're in our miracle group, reach out to the person who invited you into the group to put this to the test. Something there for all the family guys, coffee, tea, hot chocolate, sweetened options as well for anyone who has the sweet tooth. And just to wrap up, Dr. Bob, for the sweetened beverages with reishi, it's just a clever thing that our CEO did, was to put more reishi in the sweetened beverages. Not to say it's 100% the healthiest thing in the world to consume, but is so much more healthful and less calories than the traditional options you would get in a coffee shop. Could you just speak to that benefit for someone who may have concerns about fat gain from having cane sugar in their diet?
One, they created these because this is what people are buying. I often tell people, I did a little informal survey at Starbucks, and I think I counted 35 people going through the line, and I was the only one that got a coffee. A lot of people got mocha frappuccinos, caramel macchiato, all kinds of sugar stuff. That's not serving you well. But when Organo bumped up the amount of reishi in each coffee, they actually enhanced the insulin benefits, the blood sugar benefits, the fat loss benefits, some of which we discussed. And I often tell people, if you want to know how something affects your blood sugar, easy enough. Test your blood sugar, have whatever meal you're going to have. Test it again, maybe at 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and 120 minutes after to really see what's going on. You can do the same thing with reishi-infused coffee, even mocha. And we find that for our typical patient, even those with blood sugar problems, the mocha raises their blood sugar about the level of broccoli and chicken. And so that's a pretty blood sugar friendly meal, but you've got to measure it. You've got to see. And once you realize that, wow, this is a better choice, keep making the better choice. And then the best choice would probably be the king of coffee, the green tea, the capsules, things like that. If you're ready for it, dive right in. But if you still like your mocha, drink our mocha. It's a much better choice.
Sure is, guys. So I hope you have a phenomenal rest of your day. Put this to the test. And if you have any questions or queries, please make a comment in the group, and we will share with you our upcoming health calls over the coming weeks as well. So Dr. Bob, thank you so much for your passion, wisdom, and love for all things health, happiness, and success, and for sharing on this call. We will be back in our other group for conversation around all things entrepreneurship and how we merge this health movement with an entrepreneurial movement as one beautiful community.
As one of my mentors said years ago, if you can achieve your goals by yourself, they're not very big. And let's face it, your choices have gotten you to where you are. If you want to get to a different spot, we've got to make different choices. Why not partner with people that are good at helping people transition to those choices? Final question, why not now? The longer you wait to act on information, the least likely you are to act on it. Listen, if you want to try some more reishi-infused coffee, reach out to whoever referred you to this live or replay or whatever, or Eric or myself. Always, if someone referred you, go to them first. If not, one of us will be more than happy to help you get set up. And you never know where this can go. We have seen life-changing, life-saving, life-enhancing, and in other cases, health and wealth enhancing from people that decide to take this step.
Beautiful. So guys, have an amazing day. Dr. Bob, go and get rested. Do what you have to do for the rest of the day, and we will see you on the next call. Ciao for now.
All right. So long all. Bye for now.
Bye for now.